Welcome to Beyond Cost, episode number 1. Today's guest is Andreas Hartmann, former board member of ZF Friedrichshafen AG. We'll talk about M&A, culture, cars, regional expansions, and much more. I hope you will like it. Well, hello and welcome to the first episode of our podcast Beyond Costs, where we talk about manufacturing, cost, and everything in between. Today's guest at our first podcast is Mr. Hartmann. Mr. Hartmann, thank you for coming. We love having you. And I would suggest we just get going. And Mr. Hartmann, maybe for the audience, you could introduce yourself, where you come from.
Thank you for being invited and your first guest. I'm coming from Cologne, if you ask me on the location. But I think it's more well known that I used to be as well in Friedrichshafen and working with ZF Friedrichshafen AG, one of the world's biggest automotive supply companies. Beforehand, I was in German Maschinenbau, well known, even the German word is well known in the public, and I used to work in Cologne in Glockner-Humboldt-Deutz at this time. That was a publicly traded company, and I was responsible for strategy, M&A, and when I left, I was the head of group financing. And then I came to ZF Friedrichshafen in 1995. We had approximately 5 billion in turnover, and when I retired, it was almost 40 billion.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a journey.
Good time.
Good times, right?
That were good times, yeah.
And,
although we had some ups and downs as well, of course.
Yeah, and we will come to that, your journey at ZF and the automotive industry in general. So today we will mainly be talking about the German Western automotive industry and its evolution throughout the years. But let's start beforehand. You are a lawyer by education, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm a lawyer by education, yeah.
And you studied that back in
Quite some time ago. Yeah, it was last century.
Last century, yes.
Yeah, I started in 1970 on the university. And in Germany, the law education takes some time. And when I left in 1978, I started as a lawyer in a law firm, but already I used to work in that firm consulting big companies as well.
And this career that you later had, was this a direction you were thinking about, manufacturing industry? After you were finished with your studies, was that?
Yeah, the goal was always to work more in the industry. So just my father worked in the industry, and that's why I had some ideas on how this could work and how interesting it is. It's not so much as normally the German lawyer is trying to look at something that has happened, but it's something you can create to happen. And that's more interesting to do if you work in a company at the right place.
I see. And you started in the machinery manufacturing segment in the industry?
Yeah, it was not only, of course, it's not only machinery and production, it's just everything. It was tractors, it was engines, and it was industrial equipment. Broad range of products worldwide. That was all the interesting part of it.
Yeah, and that was in the 70s or 80s? It
was in the beginning of the 80s.
In the beginning of the 80s. Yeah. And how was the atmosphere as a young, educated lawyer going into industry?
How shall I say? No idea how it was when I had my first day there. But I had a good start, and so after a very short time, of course, and it was interesting. Then I moved from just the legal department in the strategy department doing M&A.
Yeah.
And later I was the head of the finance department. So it was the whole range, but it was not so much looking back and had certain cases where you had to put just a legal opinion and others worked on it. It's just creating contracts, strategies, corporations, joint ventures, M&A.
I mean, nowadays, when young people finish their studies, the cool industry segments, let's say, are software, AI, maybe high-profile consultancies. How was it back then? Was manufacturing cooler than it is now?
I just come back. If you still look in the highlights or in what are the companies that people want to work first in? It's still Porsche is very on the lead, BMW, Mercedes. Still the automotive industry is interesting. And something that is unthinkable for my generation, it's now military. Companies are very interesting for people, which for me is quite a turn. What I read today, Trumpf, which is very, how shall I say, family owned by a family which is very religious, they have now decided to even enter into the defense industry, only defense, which is totally new. So we have a turn from machinery perhaps to the more cooler things. In the late 90s, this was the multimedia and all that. Then it's the IT software, but we need IT software as well in our industries.
Yeah.
So it's turning around, but a company needs everything. So digitalization is a key factor in all industries.
In the beginning of the 80s when you started, how was digitalization back then? Because now everything from Windows to laptops to mobile phones
that you see, when I started, we still had the old typewriter type of machines, which of course was very sophisticated because it was the IBM with the Kugelkopf. I don't know what the English translation is of that, but then we had very computers. We were very big, and not everybody got it because it was too expensive. You see, it was a time when you had hard disk to put in, and it was very slow. But it started. In communication started with internal emails, sort of stuff, and yeah.
Do you remember when someone at the company said we're switching finally from fax to email? Was that a thing?
That was. You see, that was perhaps something when I changed companies. You see, when in ZF, that was a bit more sophisticated because ZF was at this time a bit more in financial strength time. You see, I don't know, at this time it still is, but my old company was in some distress. So we had to save, and digitalization, if you import it first and you install it, it costs a lot of money. And you have to change people, the mindset, you see. Everything that's new, it's a problem in the middle management.
I see. And how was that process? Do you think manufacturing was a first mover from your experience when it came to technology, or always rather conservative? What was the approach to, because during your tenure, so to say, at ZF, so many new technologies came into the workplace.
Yeah.
So what was the attitude towards new?
That's always something special. The first thing is, of course, new is not by definition good or bad. New, in a company, you have to be profitable, especially if you want to grow and you want to do research for new products. And so you always have to be in mind that what you are doing is not just a technological fun. And I always say we shouldn't do it for the Deutsches Museum Munich, but we have to do it to find customers who are interested in that technology, and that must be profitable. And I think that's key. At least ZF it's a very technology-driven company. People always had fun to do new things, to invent, to research, and all that stuff. The key thing is always to have to remind people that what they are doing must be, in the end, a product that the market wants, that the market is willing to pay for.
Makes sense. And about your personal journey at ZF, so you started there still in the law department?
No. I didn't start in the law department. I was responsible for, at this time, it was very German still, alles was Unternehmensentwicklung, Lizenzen und Unternehmenskäufe. Later, of course, it was much more English-sized, the whole thing, and it was M&A, strategy, corporate development, and that was where I started. And at this time, there was, how shall I say, for organization, we had a legal department, but that legal department, how should I say, was not so much involved in M&A and license and joint venture transactions. So we, in our department, we did the legal stuff on joint ventures, M&A.
And now we're talking about the 90s.
That was in the 90s, yeah.
Okay.
95 to 2000 approximately.
And now from a high-level strategic view of one of the biggest automotive suppliers even back then, what was the objective from a corporate development point of view in the 90s? What were you trying to achieve?
What we try to achieve is two things, is growth and profitable growth, profitability. That's the key thing, because that company was, although it was an Aktiengesellschaft, corporate, that is, but however, that's not traded at the stock exchange, so we have to care for at this time, for that company's, I call it still owned, for our company, We had to care for enough cash flow to grow and to research, to invent, and to make acquisitions. And that was the time, you see, my first journey in 1995 at the end, on beginning of 1996 when I started. You see, when I came to Peking, there was still quite, no, it was Shanghai, sorry, that was already very much, that was perhaps the city the most advanced in China, but still at this time, that was how you would perhaps imagine, especially your generation, the old Chinas. They still had the wallpapers at the entrance of the communities. There was still the hair cutter on the street, the dentist on the street. And this is when a time was when really the automotive industries in that country was at zero. You see, that was one of the big chances for us as well, because Volkswagen, and we still have to honor this, they did this joint venture in China with the two biggest automotive companies.
In the 90s.
In the 90s. And they were good to sold to them the license for a car which perhaps nobody wanted in Germany, but which was a great success. And it's still, perhaps nowadays, it's still the taxi. The old taxi.
Which car was that?
The VW Passat.
VW Passat.
That was, but the very old one. That was interesting to see. And if you came to Korea at this time, they still, all the Korean cars were licensed car by the Mitsubishi or by Toyota and so forth. So that was totally different at this time.
Yeah.
You see, and first Korea, of course, with Hyundai and Kia emerged, and China is now in the same way.
So you went in 95 to Shanghai to basically build this up and support the expansion from a supplier perspective, the Volkswagen introduction.
I say, it was not me. We jumped on a train. I jumped on a train that my predecessors already started to stepwise implement in China. But it was a very quick and very profitable and very good journey. That was a good times. You see, everybody was growth.
Yeah.
Growth rates that nobody could imagine at the beginning of the 90s.
From a strategic standpoint, you would come in as ZF as the clear technology leader in the area of transmissions. How was that journey with Chinese counterparts? I guess you did joint ventures there too on your own.
We had mostly joint ventures because by law and by, how shall I say, by culture that was necessary. And the other thing always was we had enough personnel there to build on our own. So we needed a connection. And at this time, the big OEMs, they were interested to get the technology on parts and components and things like that. And so that was always a good give and take from both sides. So it was a win-win situation. I think China was always, almost in all aspects at the first day, was a profitable and interesting business. The problem sometimes, of course, when the whole thing started, we had joint ventures as well in other countries in Asia, is in the past, the license business was to sell your old technology to get some return on your old technology and later wait for always stepwise behind. And China was already very soon interested in the latest technology. The problem always was, of course, the cost side. Yeah. What is expected? Is it really the Western German technology that they wanted, or is it something in between? And it's different in passenger cars. They wanted the latest technology. Trucks were much more complicated. Tractors were interesting, and so it's very depending on the segments.
So coming in the 90s into M&A, China and the expansion and grabbing the domestic Chinese consumer market for automotive was an objective. Were there any other objectives in terms of themes?
Of course, as you say, it was the regional expansion to get a stronger foothold, of course, in the US, to grow as well in South America, to try to be present in Korea and even more in Japan, which is very difficult because they all have their own system, the Keiretsu system and similar systems.
That is very interesting. When I looked at the North American market, or even the Chinese market, European players are always very strong, even in the supply chain. I mean, you later will come to it. I don't want to take something away. You did probably one of the biggest supplier M&A deals between ZF and TRW back then in the States. A lot of times when you look at Japan, kind of the supply chain is very closed off. It's mostly always Japanese companies. Is that a correct observation?
Yeah, the same as in Korea. So it's not so easy to come in. That was totally different in China. Perhaps we now see different moves as well. And to be honest, we don't call it in Europe the same way, but German companies, suppliers are in a very close liaison with the German OEMs, European OEMs, because they have similar technologies, a similar way of thinking. They established relationships. You have the same quality expectation, and it's, of course, quite easy to do that. So when we always blame the others to close the market, we don't close the market so much perhaps by some tariffs and other things, but in the end the thinking was always to grow with your own OEMs, and that was really the biggest chance, and that is why the German automotive industry, shall I say, has been, at least still is, to my point of view, so strong in China, because the German OEMs were very strong in China in their joint ventures, so that helped a lot.
I see. As someone who was on a supplier base and on a very high-profile supplier, ZF, maybe for the audience, complete transmission systems, and technologically, especially in the ICE division, unmatched to some extent.
Amongst others.
Amongst others.
Amongst others. We are, I think, one of the biggest, at least after the acquisition of WABCO. ZF is the biggest supplier in the truck industry. We are extremely strong in the off-road industry. So it's not only transmissions. Always everybody said, because it's Zahnradfabrik, this is the old name, and it was the transmissions for the Zeppelin that is the origin of ZF in the 1910s, so even before my time. And but they are doing a lot of other things: chassis technology, steering technology, braking technologies. So the whole system more of a car, except for engines, and we don't build cars. ZF don't build cars.
In the 90s, when you started in M&A, did anyone talk about electric vehicles?
If you say what I read, it was a long time before. Porsche already built an electric car in the 1920s. That's what I read somehow. Interesting enough. No, we didn't talk about what we talked about a lot of things, electrification. So on steering, you see, that was the start. And from mechanical and hydraulic steerings, it went to electrical steerings. And at this time, everybody said, oh, electrical steering is only good for smaller cars. And after a very short period of time, it's now in all the big cars as well. So that was a part of the electrification. There's a lot of electrification even in an engine and a transmission, you see. They are all somehow related with software, with electrics, with ships and other things. So
but what I mean is
not the electric drive, no.
Not the electric drive.
No.
When was the first time where on a strategic level you were confronted with, this is a thing, we need to work on this, we need to have a plan for this?
How shall I say, do we think we need? It's a difficult thing. You see, disruptor technologies always it's a heartache for everybody. And at this time, was the beginning of 2010, that was the time when the automotive industry started to be confronted with a lot of new technologies, with a lot of ideas, and that was when even people who were not so much involved in the automotive industry had good ideas what we should do, because it's not quite as simple. You see, a car is still quite a complex thing. It's not a handy, which if it doesn't work, it's not good, but it's not a problem. If a car doesn't work, people may be killed and other things. So it's a much different thing. That started in the 2010s, and it was, on the one hand, it was the electric drive, and the other thing is the automatic drive. And even people from the software industry told me, it was a well-known German entrepreneur who always had the idea that you can only do electric cars and automatic cars. That should be a combination that only can work that way. And that's why we have to hurry. That was 2013 when we had these discussions. The only problem already at this time was indication from the OEMs what are the volumes and what they wanted to do. And so that changed on a quarterly basis. So at this time we started to have quarterly reviews, and the 500,000 units from the last quarter changed to 0 in the next quarter.
Yeah.
And that was the time when it went up and down. And of course, in a company which has a long-standing mechanical tradition, people are of course happy if volumes disappear with new technologies. That's one reason you have to respect. And we still are in the same way. It's going forward and have sudden breaks, you see, in all these things. And it's a long journey. It's still going on. And if you see nowadays the political discussions, they're different, but it's still similar on the same level at this time. What are the volumes? What are the profitability? What are we doing? Of course, what is not in the mind at this time is that perhaps China would be a strong competitor.
Yes.
Later on. That was not on the mind because still the automotive industry in China was joint ventures with Western.
Yes.
Or Japanese and Korean.
Do you remember the first time it was really discussed as a topic, and before we're talking even about production volumes? But
no, we will. Yes, what was around 2010, and that was the time when we started to think, because we knew already at this time that will endanger our transmission business. Of course, you don't need a 6-speed transmission anymore. Perhaps you need a sort of transmission because you still have to somehow get the, how shall I say, you get it on the road by Zahnrad, but not as many as you need in a big transmission. And that was the time when we thought, what should we do? And is there a way that perhaps we can somehow compensate for the decrease in your in-house production volumes, not so much the volumes in total, but the part that you are producing, so the Auslastung.
Some may argue that one of the main factors why the automotive industry in Germany was always so strong was a very strong local market. It was driven by innovation. There's a lot of different brands. People are very much aware of cars and the function of cars, and that pushes the brands in a very local market with direct feedback. This is some argumentations that flies around out there. Taking that and accepting that, do you think it was a mistake to not push more extensively locally, that Germany first becomes an EV market itself before thinking about what to do with an EV market in China or in other regions?
That was not so much the thinking. You see, we always thought very international at this time. Of course, the German branding, the German highways, the no speed limits, that help, but that's more for the newspapers, I think. Some people like it. We still have foreigners coming to Germany to race on the highway, but as we have a lot of speed limits, it's not so much fun anymore. But that's more the, how shall I say, it's more the feeling, gut feeling. It's not so much logic, but mainly that was not the issue of the German automotive industry. The issue always is how do we get enough volumes from OEMs, and we are depending on the OEMs, of course, as a supply industry, that this is financially viable industry. Yes, and at this time nobody was already discussing state funds or other things. That was more the idea, in which direction will we develop, and everybody thought sometimes it starts to fly, and that would help, but it's a long way. You see, it's almost now 15 years that this is going on.
Do you think that this event fundamentally changed something in the dynamic between this partnership, which was very tight between OEM and supplier, basically every strategic move?
No, not yet. I think, of course, we are all sitting in the same boat, and it's we always talking only solely on e-mobility. It's as well the automatic driving and other things. There's a lot of things that will really change the whole industry. Is, as I say, for me, is a disrupting development that we do have. It's the good thing for the automotive industry is it's not coming overnight like with handies or with a typewriter and other things. It's a longer period, but it's very disruptive in a lot of things, because you see the Wertschöpfungskette will be totally different in future for the OEMs and for the suppliers, and from tier 1 to tier 5. And the OEMs will more in-house production, resource from suppliers, because they need to fill their capacities. The tier 1 will do the same with the tier 2, the tier 2 with the tier 3. So it will be quite a different. And the other thing is, today it's everybody is sitting in the same row, but everybody wants to have his profitability, and so the OEM is pushing the tier one to reduce prices. The tier one will do the same, scale down as well, and that's a big problem because nobody makes money today, or really good money in this industry.
But isn't it a problem that, for example, the OEMs now announced, especially for emerging markets or the Chinese automotive market, that they want to source locally? So in the past, where the OEM went as ZF, you went with them, or as a supplier in Germany.
Yeah.
Now it's really difficult in terms of being cost competitive, and I will come to that too.
Yeah, cost competitive.
Is that nudging at the core of the partnership that
No.
the German OEMs do not expand anymore globally with the German tier ones, or
They do.
they do?
They do.
Yes.
That's at least I'm not, of course, not in the day-to-day business anymore with this, but I don't see that much as a difference. On the one hand, of course, they will do as well in China. They will do their with cost engineering, they will source as cheap as possible, and of course, even if they source from their European partners, of course, what they do have in mind is what is the cost in that market for that product, you see. And if the Chinese one can really supply cheaper, then they will confront the European, their supply base with the same conditions. And if the gap is too big, of course, they will switch. On the other hand, that was the same with the Japanese and the same with the Koreans. And when they came to Europe, you see, they brought, of course, their own Karetsu system with them. But as well, they were confronted with European suppliers, which were perhaps more experienced or cheaper. And we had already in the 90s a shift from West Europe to then what is called Eastern Europe after the fall down of the walls. And that you always had this shifting, and you have to be cost competitive. And that's, of course, a big problem in Germany as well. Cost-wise, Germany is perhaps not the most competitive country anymore. We have as well with all the energy prices, with the big, overwhelming bureaucracy. So that is not helping German OEMs and supply industry to stay competitive. And that's the biggest challenge. And this is why you can read every day now the layoffs that the big German OEMs and suppliers are not planning to do because they have fun to do it, because they are forced to do it at least to stay competitive.
And
you see, you always had to move. We had Eastern Europe, we had, of course, then low-cost country from down to Vietnam. I think this jacket is from Vietnam.
I mean, as a person who has limited history on this, it feels a bit that this time it's a bit different. It's bigger and it's faster, the change.
Yeah.
Is it true, or is it just a young guy who doesn't know anything about the past thinking that his event is the biggest?
It's good that you are saying this, because for your generation it's still very slow. Because it's not overnight. But of course, it's really a big change, because I said we had this rupture in technology. You see, always compared with the camera industry, you see, and we will see there will be a change. Certain OEM suppliers will disappear, others will come out of, and the big problem today is as well for the established companies as well. In China, you have today, what I read, approximately 100 e-car manufacturers.
Yes, yes.
And out of them, by history or definition or by how it is, it's perhaps 3 will survive on a worldwide scale. Yeah, the issue you have to think: who are the 3 ones who will survive? Which you want to tie up, and which one you want to build a relationship with, because they might be dying already, or they might die tomorrow. You see, that's the key issue is you cannot play with all the hundreds. You have to focus on certain ones, and you have to be lucky, perhaps, if they are the surviving ones. Mm-hmm. And the other one is, of course, what the Chinese are doing as well, is they have their own bases they will bring to Europe as well. So that's really, and it's going fast. And as I said, it's not only the e-mobility, it's extremely as well, which somehow has disappeared in the press, but it was a big theme 2 years ago still. It's the automatic drive.
Yeah.
You see, when everybody as well, and ZF did this as well, like a lot of others, they had these automatic mobility serviced minibuses running around, which, at what I read now, they stopped this. It was a time when everybody was going into this automatic drive thing.
I see. Now, you were at ZF until what year?
I left. Finally, I left.
Yeah.
2018, yeah.
2018.
Yeah.
How do you do this when you have such a big organization that is built on a lot of tradition and very established processes, which are a big part why it's successful as it is? How do you bring here a shift? How do you communicate, implement maybe things that on the short term are not popular? How do you change a mindset?
That's really a big challenge, because the one thing is, of course, and that makes things not easier, the profitability still comes for a long time from the old products, from those people who are really living and liking them. Whereas the new ones tend to be perhaps not as profitable. And that's a challenge to really move the people into the right direction, because the other ones say, why my profitability are creating those strange ideas for the new ones to come, so these nerds and other things, how they are called, in that direction. So that's a really, you have to do this in a very careful way, to not to lose the old ones, which are necessary to still be profitable, to change their mindset, and as well to attract the new ones. And the biggest problem is that the way to communicate is not on the same level always. The ones say, yeah, that does not always have the same meaning for the others. So the key thing is how to create communication in a way that
common language.
Yeah, common language that people understand in their head.
Talking about common language, I have another question towards culture, because arguably you were at the head of the execution of one of the biggest automotive supplier deals ever. Back then, ZF had revenue around
25, 30 million.
25, and
25,
yeah, and TRW had around 20,
11.
11. So that's two
Darn,
very
as far
big
as I remember,
organizations. I mean, we don't have the time to go into the details of how to structure such a deal, but people always say the most important part of a merger is the post-merger.
Yeah.
And you famously once said you have to make sure that 1 + 1 is actually
least
3, at least 2.
At least 2.
At least 2.
That's the key factor, not 1.5 or 1 or 0. Yeah, that happens unfortunately quite often.
How do you approach that? Because these are two full-fledged big organizations, each doing billions of revenue.
Yeah. So if you talk to some people, they always say we did it totally wrong, because they were what they feel the losers, because you have to reshape the companies. And a lot of people who were sitting on their chair now for 20 years, you have to tell them you have to go to another chair, which might be much more interesting, but they don't think that's much more interesting because it's a different chair. So that's really a challenge, and you have to do this. Of course, if you make such big deals, we ZF created a bigger organization for the post-merger, which then did all these things, and we did it, of course, when we already when we knew that this transaction would be happening. We already thought how we can organize this, and there are so different ways that you can do this. You can either say we have acquired that company, we do it our way. Well, then you can say no, leave it as it is, and start slowly. And there's not that one recipe that is successful. That is the key is really how to implement it in a way that at least people are not against. That's the worst thing. If people are against, that's the key. So if you can do it in a way that people are against, that's already a big prospect. The next one is you have to look for those people who are really interested in moving ahead. I think that's something that's not so easy, especially if you have a worldwide company with tens of thousands of people.
That's true. Maybe before we come into the future, we talk about the big change in automotive in terms of technology, always about the powertrain and the electronic drive. Another change that we see, especially among Chinese consumers, and I have read papers that argue, for example, that more than 50% of the cost of a car in future will be software for the car, and more Chinese consumers or general consumers globally have a very high affinity when it comes to the software features. So ZF did not do this move to go really into the software part.
But what does it mean, software? Of course, we have a lot of software. Every body transmission has a software.
That's true.
Every chassis component has a software. Every steering, which is now steer-by-wire, brake-by-wire, it all have software. So there's a lot of software in that company, definitely. What you think is more perhaps the media sort of software?
I think in general, what is a clear trend is that the amount of software in order for a car to operate is increasing, be it embedded or...
That's already happening since the 80s.
Exactly.
See, I still remember when Motorola came to us in Cologne and had this GPS way on for the engine to control all these nice things via GPS systems. That was very new at this time, but the software, that was in the 80s. So there's a lot of software in the products now for ages, to put it that way. But I think if you talk what you think software is more, that the difference between perhaps what we think is the old generation, although if you have small children, a boy within, they still like cars, you see, especially if they sound like a 12-cylinder engine. But the other generation is more that they say is more a computer, it's a more media-based car. Yeah. And of course, as long as we do not have this automatic driving, it's still perhaps not as interesting, but that will come. That will come, surely it will come. But this is the other fight. It's not only the Chinese OEMs, the Chinese classical automotive suppliers, but it's a lot as well that other industries are coming, Huawei and other manufacturers of cell phones, of whatever sort of media things. And then we have the big fight, to whom belong the data of a car? Because you see, a car is it creates so much data which are interesting for a lot of companies, for instance, like Google. Where is Mr. Hartmann going? What is his preferred restaurant? You see, if I enter my car today, which is perhaps not so sophisticated in that, but whenever I start, they tell me where I should go, and I don't like this. But the new generation perhaps like this. Like your cell phone. Do you like to be that your cell phone? Do you need it? Do you think it's helpful, or do you think it's the contrary of helpful? Yeah. And this is whom are the customers to address? And what I think I've now in the car, and I ordered the new car. The old one at least had 3 or 4 mechanical devices for temperature and for the heating of the seating or for the radio. The new one, you always have to do it on your screen, which I think, at least for my generation, is dangerous because you have to look at the screen and you do not do it by intention. So,
self-driving cars.
Yeah, it's too early. It's not there. It's not there. It's not there. Yes. Yeah, perhaps I need a self-driving Rolata one day, perhaps.
I think you're still far away from that. So yeah, then just at the end, maybe giving these mega trends, and they are actively reshaping the global competitive landscape in the automotive sector. What is your projection?
I always said and I repeat myself, it's a disruption. And the big thing is everything happens at the same time. You see, you have a disruption on perhaps the transmission or sort of this technology. We have the transition on the automotive. We have the transition in regions. And of course, like in China, if you are just starting, it's much easier to build on new technologies than to exchange old to new technologies. Especially, you need different people, you need different manufacturing. You have to keep the balance between the old and new technology, whereas if you start at zero, it's much easier. Mm-hmm. So I think this in overall, perhaps the time, the intensity, and the global thing is something new. But overall, that has always happened in all industries. And some will disappear and some will not disappear. There's camera industry. You see, the Japanese were very strong. Are they still very strong with the cell phones? Yeah, Nikon is still there. Minolta isn't there.
I see. And what do you think?
I have no idea who will survive. I only hope that.
I see.
No, I'm quite sure that some of the next one is, you see, when I was young, Ford, it was a Cologne company. For me, Ford was always a German company. Ford has somehow is very decreasing, to be honest. On their market share is at 6%. I remember the times of the Volkswagen Golf and Opel Kadett, when they had always a market share of 18%. 2 years was Opel with 18% when they had the new cars. When the new Golf came, it had 18%. But where's Opel nowadays? It's part of Stellantis. So there will be, of course, more consolidation in Germany, especially much more consolidation on the supply industries in Europe. There will not be hundreds surviving Chinese companies. There will be, like in the US, perhaps two, will be 2 or 3 or 4. There will be, India is still not sure what happenings in India. And Europe, they will be as well. You had already a lot of consolidation. Stellantis, they have all the well-known brands of the past. I have no clear view, and you will see.
Mr. Hartmann, thank you for your always differentiated estimate, and way more importantly, thank you for giving us context about what were the major drivers. So this is the end of today's episode. If you like these type of talks and want to support us, share, like, write about it, comment, and see you soon. Once again, thank you, Mr. Hartmann.
Thank you. It was good meeting you again.